Open your fridge right now and read the labels. Soda, bread, salad dressing, yogurt, barbecue sauce. There's a good chance the same ingredient shows up in almost every one of them, and it isn't sugar. It's a syrup that didn't exist in the American diet before the 1970s. Within about 15 years, it had replaced sugar in nearly every soft drink and processed food in the country. That didn't happen because it tasted better, or because nutritionists recommended it, or because consumers asked for it. It happened because of a decision made in Washington to protect a handful of sugar growers, a decision that, decades later, is still showing up on your bathroom scale. The story doesn't start with a conspiracy. It starts with two chemists trying to solve a boring industrial problem. In 1957, Richard Marshall and Earl Cooley, working for the Clinton Corn Processing Company in Iowa, discovered an enzyme called glucose isomerase, which could convert the glucose in cornstarch into fructose, a sweeter sugar. They published the discovery in the journal Science and patented the process in 1960. At the time, it went nowhere. The process couldn't be scaled up cheaply enough to matter. For almost a decade, the discovery sat in a drawer while Japanese researchers quietly picked up the technique and kept refining it. By the mid-1960s, Clinton Corn was shipping the first commercial batches of what would be called high fructose corn syrup, or HFCS. Nobody outside the food industry had heard of it. Nobody had any reason to care. That was about to change, not because of the chemistry, but because of two unrelated decisions made in Washington a few years apart. In 1972, the United States made a massive, unexpected grain sale to the Soviet Union. Corn prices spiked overnight, and American farmers responded the only way the market told them to. They planted more. The Secretary of Agriculture at the time, Earl Butz, told farmers to plant fence row to fence row. They did. By the mid-1970s, corn prices had crashed back down, but the planting habit didn't stop. Subsidies kept it profitable to keep growing corn even when the market didn't need it. The result was a structural surplus, more corn than the country could use as food, feed, or export. That surplus needed a buyer, and at almost the exact same moment, the government was about to make sugar, corn syrup's biggest competitor, artificially expensive. In 1976, President Gerald Ford tripled the import tax on sugar. In the early 1980s, President Reagan went further, imposing strict import quotas to protect domestic sugar growers from cheaper sugar produced abroad. The declared goal was to prop up American sugar farmers, and it worked, for them. By 1988, sugar was selling for about 22 cents a pound in the United States, while the world price was roughly 10.5 cents. Every 1 cent rise added an estimated $250 to $300 million to the country's collective food bill. For any company that used enormous quantities of sugar, soda makers, bakeries, candy manufacturers, that price gap was not a minor inconvenience. It was an invitation to switch. And there was already a replacement sitting in Midwestern grain elevators, backed by a corn industry that had spent years and considerable lobbying money making sure Washington understood its value. High fructose corn syrup, now cheap, plentiful, and roughly a third to a half the price of sugar. Coca-Cola started blending corn syrup into its formula in 1980. By November 1984, both Coca-Cola and Pepsi announced they were removing sugar from their sodas entirely and switching to 100% high fructose corn syrup. Most other soft drink makers followed within a year or two. It wasn't framed as a health decision. It was framed, correctly, as a cost decision. Sugar consumption in the United States fell by hundreds of thousands of tons almost immediately, while high fructose corn syrup use kept climbing, from about 500,000 tons in 1975 to nearly 6 million tons by 1987. Within a decade, the sweetener that two chemists had struggled to make profitable in the 1960s was inside the best-selling beverage on the planet, and from there into bread, cereal, condiments, and thousands of other packaged foods where it functioned as a cheap source of sweetness, moisture, and shelf life. Here's where the story moves from economics to biology, and where it's worth being precise, because this is the part most videos get wrong in one direction or another. Ordinary table sugar, sucrose, is roughly half glucose and half fructose. High fructose corn syrup used in beverages is typically around 55% fructose and 45% glucose, chemically very close to table sugar, not a radically different substance. Most metabolic research finds the two sweeteners behave similarly in the body when consumed in equal amounts. That nuance matters because a lot of popular claims overstate how different HFCS is from sugar itself. What the research does show clearly is what fructose in general does once it reaches the liver. Unlike glucose, which is used by cells throughout the body, fructose is metabolized almost entirely in the liver. In large, frequent amounts, that pathway drives the liver to produce new fat, a process called de novo lipogenesis, and it depletes the liver's energy currency, ATP, in a way glucose does not. Multiple clinical studies link high fructose intake, whether from sugar or corn syrup, to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, elevated triglycerides, insulin resistance, and increased uric acid. Today, close to half of American adults are estimated to have some degree of fatty liver disease, a condition that was barely recognized as a distinct diagnosis before the 1980s. None of this means high fructose corn syrup alone caused the obesity epidemic. Total calorie intake, portion sizes, sedentary lifestyles, and the sheer volume of added sugar from every source all rose together during the same decades, and researchers still debate how much weight to assign to any single ingredient. But the timing is hard to ignore. The sharpest rise in American obesity and type 2 diabetes rates began in the very years HFCS was flooding into the food supply, and fructose overload, however it arrives, is one of the few mechanisms with a clear, reproducible biological pathway to liver damage. By the late 1990s, high fructose corn syrup had become one of the most common added ingredients in the American food supply, present in soft drinks, breads, cereals, condiments, canned fruit, flavored yogurts, and sauces that had nothing sweet about their name at all. None of this required a single new law banning sugar or mandating corn syrup. It only required making one ingredient artificially expensive and letting a subsidized, cheaper substitute fill the gap. The market did the rest, exactly as the policy's designers intended, just not for the reason most consumers ever heard about. No single agency ever announced a plan to change what Americans eat. A tariff meant to protect a few thousand sugar farmers combined with a corn surplus nobody had planned for, and together they quietly rewrote the sweetener in almost every product on the shelf. Nobody voted on high fructose corn syrup. It won by being the cheapest option left standing after the sugar market was deliberately distorted. And by the time the health research caught up, it was already inside nearly everything Americans ate. One soda isn't going to hurt you, but the next time you read high fructose corn syrup on a label, remember what you now know. It isn't there because it's better or because you chose it. It's there because 40 years ago, a trade policy made its only real competitor too expensive to use. And in a strange twist, that story isn't finished. In 2025, after public pressure over ultra-processed food, Coca-Cola announced it would sell a version of its flagship soda made with U.S. cane sugar again, the same sugar its own formula had replaced back in 1984. The tariffs that started this whole chain of events, however, are still on the books. If this changed how you look at your pantry, leave a like, and tell me in the comments, which ingredient label are you going to actually read tonight?